The stars have always whispered of the great devourer, but none could truly understand the darkness until it came for them. It is not a tale for the faint-hearted or the uninformed. This is the grim story of what happens when a hive fleet consumes a planet, when the endless, mindless hunger of the Tyranids turns worlds into husks, and the silence of the void marks the final triumph of a ravenous galaxy-spanning force. In the cold, metallic expanse of the Imperium, a single world, once teeming with life, now echoes with the terrifying certainty of extinction. How does a planet so full of promise fall under the crushing maw of the Tyranid swarm? What horrors lie in the wake of their arrival? This is not a victory tale, but a countdown to oblivion. It's not just a battle for survival. It's an entire species, a whole world, fighting against the impossible. Before we plunge further into this nightmarish journey, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Join us as we unveil the depths of the Tyranid threat and what awaits those who stand against it. Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. The hive worlds of the Imperium hum with the ceaseless cadence of industry, where every breath, every turn of the cog echoes with the promise of imperial dominance. The manufactorums churn day and night, their furnace-lit interiors casting harsh shadows on the faces of the workers, each one a cog in a vast, unforgiving machine. On the surface, the cities glitter with the lights of human endeavor. Soldiers drill in the barracks, and priests chant prayers to the Emperor, their voices rising with the anticipation of the next conflict. The galaxy spins onward, seemingly oblivious to the shadow stretching over it from the far reaches of the stars. But within the quiet void between the stars, the Tyranids are stirring. Far beyond the reach of the Astra Militarum's watchful eyes, a slow, unyielding wave gathers strength. No one knows it yet, but the fate of a planet is already sealed. The first whispers come not in the form of alarm bells or the call to arms, but as the faintest tremor in the universe's rhythm. The stars themselves seem to fade, like distant embers dying out. It is a subtle shift, so quiet, so insignificant at first, that most ignore it entirely. Those who do not dismiss it as a trick of the light, a momentary glitch in the vast cosmic dance. But in truth, it is the beginning of the end. In the streets of the capital, the air is thick with the hum of daily life. Merchants hawk their wares, street children play among the shadows, and the citizens of this proud imperial world go about their business, oblivious to the creeping terror in the dark. The Emperor's light shines down on them, but it is an illusion, one that blinds them to the abyss yawning at the edge of their world. The enemy, a faceless monstrosity born of the darkest corners of the galaxy, has already set its eyes upon them. The first ships, colossal and insectoid, drift in the shadow of the planet like gargantuan predators stalking their prey. The Emperor's gaze, ever watchful, has not yet turned to this distant world. There are too many others in need of his attention. The Great Crusade is ever expanding, and the burdens of his reign are felt in every corner of the galaxy. The hive fleets are merely a rumor in the back rooms of the Astra Militarum's command centers, far from their attention, far from the hearts of the Imperium's citizens. Even the High Lords of Terra, those who govern with an iron fist, cannot know the depth of the threat that looms on the horizon. The Tyranids are coming, and with them, the promise of total consumption. But for now, all is calm. For now, the world remains blissfully ignorant. Yet in the dark recesses of the Astronomicon, far from the bustling streets and echoing manufactorums, a lone astropath receives a flicker, a distorted message carried on a dying frequency. A single word cuts through the static. Swarm. It is too weak to be a full warning, too fragmented to mean anything. But it is enough to send a ripple through the foundations of the Imperium's defense network. In the silence of the night, the stars have whispered a secret, one that will soon tear through the galaxy like a ravenous beast. But for now, the world sleeps, and so they remain unaware. The fleet has arrived. The Tyranids, ancient and unknowable, have set their sights on this world. Their hunger, insatiable and eternal, is about to be unleashed. It is not a question of if the world will fall, but when. The world's fate is already sealed, and the swarm is already upon them. The question now is simple. How long will it take for the last echoes of human life to fade into oblivion? The swarm moves silently in the void, as it always does. And soon, the people of this world will awaken to the nightmare. Chapter 2. The Arrival of the Hive Fleet. The first sign came not in the form of explosions or fiery devastation, but as a strange and eerie silence that blanketed the world. No alarm sounded, no sirens rang in the streets. The sun, still high in the sky, cast long shadows across the urban sprawl. But there was an unnatural stillness in the air. People paused for a moment, feeling it. The quiet that wasn't a part of the usual bustle. The hum of industry, the chatter in the streets, the rattle of distant machines. All of it seemed to still for just a heartbeat. It was the kind of quiet that makes the blood run cold, the type that says something is terribly wrong without a single word being spoken. Above them, the skies darkened. At first, the change was subtle, a shift in the heavens that could easily be ignored. The stars flickered, and a shadow stretched across the planet, blurring the line between night and day. The astronomers, those few who still gazed at the heavens through telescopes and data slates, noticed it first, but their reports went largely unnoticed, dismissed as nothing more than the anomalies of a world so entrenched in its own constant activity. It wasn't until the ships arrived that the truth became undeniable. They came not as a fleet, but as a swarm, indescribable, countless, and incomprehensible. Their hulls were living things, dark and sleek like the blackest of insectoid nightmares. As the first bio-ships breached the atmosphere, they did so with a cold efficiency that was almost mechanical. The skies lit up with their presence, not in flashes of battle, but in the slow, inevitable descent of the swarm, like a cloud gathering to smother a flame. The people below had no time to react. They had no way of knowing that the death of their world was already in motion. In the span of a few hours, the first of the Tyranid forces, massive, unstoppable, landed in the outlying districts. Their tendrils sank deep into the ground, spreading outward like veins reaching for the heart of the world. They were not here to negotiate. They were not here to speak or demand. They were here to consume, to strip every ounce of life and energy from the planet, until nothing remained but a hollow shell. The first cities to fall were silent, their people consumed without ceremony, without warning. The military, still unprepared for such an attack, scrambled to respond. The Astra Militarum, those stalwart soldiers of the Imperium, sent their tanks and regiments out in a desperate bid to fight back. But the Tyranid swarm was unlike anything they had ever faced. They were not creatures to be driven off. They were a tide, a force of nature that could not be halted by mere guns and bombs. The soldiers felt their own powerlessness in the face of an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. The very air began to hum with the alien energy of the Tyranids, each bio-shift a brushstroke in a cosmic nightmare. The Imperial commanders called for reinforcements, but in the chaos, no one knew where the enemy had come from. No one knew what the Tyranids truly were, only that they had arrived with an endless hunger, one that no war machine, no psychic power, no amount of human courage could satiate. They were something beyond comprehension, something that seemed to ignore the very laws of nature. Each beast a part of something much greater, something terrifying. The Hive Fleet had arrived, and the people of the world were now only prey in an intricate, horrific cycle of consumption. As the sky grew darker and the cities fell silent, the few survivors began to realize the true horror of their situation. The Tyranids were not an enemy that could be defeated with honor or valor. They were the end of all things. Their hunger was endless, and now it was turning toward them. Chapter 3. The Panic and the Fight. The first signs of resistance were fragile, desperate acts. Imperial Guard regiments, freshly mobilized and filled with the fervor of duty, charged toward the Tyranid bioships that were landing with increasing frequency. But no amount of firepower seemed to halt the onslaught. Tanks, their armor thick and formidable, crumbled under the crushing weight of the Tyranid organisms. The very ground itself seemed to rise up against them as the swarm's tendrils spread like a plague across the planet's surface. What was once a battlefield now resembled a charnel house, and the soldiers of the Imperium, hardened and brutal, found themselves caught in the teeth of an enemy that didn't care for their discipline, their honor, or their resolve. The panic began at the edges, in the outer districts where the first to fall had little warning. They were the ones who saw the shadow fall first, the civilians, the laborers, the farmers, and shopkeepers. They saw the ships come, but had no understanding of what they were. There was no name for it, no story of an enemy so relentless, so cold. The first reports were fragmented, unclear. Strange creatures, a horde, something that tore through their defenses like a beast through a paper wall. News of the attack spread like wildfire, but by then, the damage had already been done. The Tyranid presence was everywhere, on the streets, in the sky, beneath the ground. Within hours, the planetary defense systems were overrun, their commanders in full retreat. The last-ditch efforts to coordinate between the remaining military units quickly dissolved into chaos. The Tyranid forces had already embedded themselves too deeply into the world's crust, spreading their influence through every corner. What started as scattered skirmishes turned into full-blown panic. Armies crumbled, communication lines were severed, and any semblance of order evaporated in the overwhelming tide of destruction. It wasn't just a matter of physical superiority. It was the sheer alienness of the Tyranids that broke the will of the defenders. The Astra Militarum, those battle-hardened soldiers who had faced countless threats across the stars, found themselves utterly unprepared for the Tyranids. Their enemies were unlike any they had fought before. The Orcs, the Chaos Forces, the Eldari, they all had form, had a kind of purpose. But the Tyranids were a force of nature, a living, breathing, unstoppable swarm that seemed to know no limits. The idea of survival seemed like a fleeting hope, as each day passed with fewer soldiers, fewer civilians, and fewer signs of life. The people of the Imperium had learned the cost of ignorance. When the Tyranids landed, they had no concept of how deep the hunger of the Hive Fleet truly ran. No one had seen the way the creatures worked together, their perfect symbiosis, their relentless drive to consume all they could. A world once full of life, industry, and culture was rapidly turning into a graveyard, its remains consumed not by fire or famine, but by the cold and brutal efficiency of an alien swarm. The once thriving cities became breeding grounds for more Tyranids, and every effort to stop them seemed to only fuel the beast. Yet, there were still pockets of resistance. The brave, the desperate, the broken, all still clung to the idea of fighting back, even as the odds grew impossibly long. Some tried to fight with the weapons they had, handguns, shotguns, plasma rifles, but the Tyranids were too fast, too many. Others, perhaps more desperate, turned to the grim technology of the Adeptus Mechanicus, seeking to harness the remnants of old war machines and forgotten weapons to hold the swarm at bay. But it was all in vain. As the planet's surface began to buckle under the weight of the Tyranid onslaught, hope turned to despair, and the thin veneer of civilization began to peel away. Even in the face of total annihilation, there were those who refused to give up. A handful of brave souls, soldiers and civilians alike, took to the streets in an attempt to slow the tide. Each street fought for, each building turned into a fortress, each door held as though it were the last. The roar of bolter fire, the whine of laser guns, the boom of artillery. These sounds echoed across the cities, but they were drowned out by the relentless horde. Those who fought knew they were not fighting for victory, but for time. Time for others to escape. Time to hold the line long enough for one last, futile stand. The people of the Imperium, known for their unshakable faith in the Emperor, found that their faith could not protect them from this new and horrifying threat. There would be no last-minute rescue, no deus ex machina to save them. This battle was not about honor or glory. It was about survival. But for many, the price of survival was too high. Chapter 4. The Descent into Madness. As the days turned to weeks, the once thriving cities began to rot in the shadow of the Tyranid infestation. The air, once crisp with the scent of industry and sweat, now carried the heavy odor of decay. The skies had darkened, not from the setting sun, but from the endless swarms of alien creatures blocking out the light. Every inch of the planet seemed to belong to the Hive Fleet now. The survivors, scattered and broken, stumbled through a war-torn landscape that barely resembled the world they had once known. Buildings that once stood proud as symbols of the Imperium were now reduced to rubble, their hollowed-out shells haunted by the few who remained. In the outer districts, the fight had long since turned into a struggle for basic survival. The people no longer fought for the Emperor or for the planet. They fought for the right to live another day. The familiar sense of order that had once been the heartbeat of their lives had been stripped away, replaced by a grim and unrelenting chaos. The streets were no longer filled with vendors or families, but with the broken, the desperate, and the dying. Those who still remembered the imperial creed clung to it desperately, whispering prayers to a god who, for all they knew, had long since turned his back on them. The Tyranid influence spread like an infection. The creatures, with their unholy hunger, did not simply destroy. They consumed every aspect of life. The cities themselves became breeding grounds, the ground beneath their feet alive with the movement of the swarm. Buildings, once full of the laughter and life of humanity, were now cold, silent tombs. The Tyranids were not just conquering the planet, they were twisting it, turning it into something unrecognizable. The ground would tremble, not from battle, but from the writhing mass of alien organisms beneath it, carving their nests into the very heart of the world. In the ruined remains of a once vibrant city, a few survivors huddled in the dark. The once proud defenders of the planet had become shadows of their former selves, broken by the unyielding march of the Tyranid swarm. Their minds, once sharp and focused on the Emperor's light, were now clouded with fear, uncertainty, and madness. The very presence of the Tyranid forces seemed to twist reality itself. Time became fluid, distorted. The survivors couldn't tell if it was hours, days, or weeks that had passed since the Hive Fleet descended upon them. All that remained was a gnawing sense of dread, a constant awareness that death was never far away. The Tyranids didn't just tear through cities, they shattered the psyche of those left behind. The survivors, who once held fast to the belief that their planet could withstand anything, were now broken, fragmented. The constant threat of annihilation had eaten away at their resolve, leaving only a hollow shell of their former selves. Where once there had been pride and honor in the Emperor's name, there was now only terror and hopelessness. The soldiers who had fought valiantly in the beginning now turned on each other, haunted by the constant knowledge that they were doomed. They would fight, yes, but they no longer cared for the glory of the Imperium. They fought because it was all they had left, a last desperate attempt to hold on to something, anything that resembled life. But the madness was not just psychological. The very landscape of the planet had been altered, mutated by the Tyranids' presence. Flora and fauna twisted into grotesque parodies of their former selves, as if the very essence of life itself had been corrupted by the swarm. Trees, once tall and proud, were now twisted, their trunks blackened and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The ground was no longer solid earth, but a mass of shifting, writhing tendrils. The planet was becoming the Hive Fleet, and the survivors were mere remnants of a once great civilization. The deeper the survivors descended into the madness, the harder it became to differentiate between the living and the dead. Corpses littered the streets, many mutilated beyond recognition by the creatures that had consumed them. Yet, even in the face of such horror, the survivors clung to a faint, fragile hope that the Emperor's light might yet save them. It was a hope that flickered weakly in their hearts, barely a whisper against the overwhelming darkness of the Tyranid presence. There were no more battles to be won. There was no more fight left in the survivors, only the gnawing, unrelenting fear of what the Tyranids would do next. The cities were lost, the planet was lost, and those who remained were only the last echoes of a dying world. In the end, the swarm would leave nothing behind. There would be no hero's tale, no last stand, no triumph. There would be only silence, the silence of extinction. Chapter 5. The End of All Things. The silence that followed the Tyranids' destruction was absolute. It was a quiet like no other, not born of peace, but of utter desolation. The once thriving world now stood as a hollow monument to human arrogance, a planet left to wither in the wake of a swarm too powerful, too relentless to be stopped. The last echoes of human life had long since faded into the wind, the memory of bustling cities, markets, and fields of harvest, now only a distant, unreal dream. The Tyranid forces, having consumed every scrap of life, turned their attention to the planet's very bones. The mountains, once towering and proud, crumbled under the weight of the alien infestation, and the oceans themselves seemed to pull back, as if retreating from the blight that had claimed the world. All that remained were lifeless ruins and the perpetual, undying hum of the Hive Fleet, a reminder that the end was never truly an end. It was a transition, a shift in the cosmic cycle, one that the Imperium would never see. The remnants of the human race, those few who had been fortunate enough to escape the swarm's initial onslaught, had scattered to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. They were no longer soldiers of the Imperium. They were survivors. And even then, their survival came at the cost of their humanity. No more were they part of the great, noble empire that had once spread across the stars. They had become broken refugees, fleeing not only from the Tyranids, but from the very idea of hope. Their faith in the Emperor had been shattered, not by the physical might of the Tyranid swarm, but by the realization that even the most fervent devotion could not protect them from such an unstoppable, all-consuming force. The horrors they had witnessed had turned their once vibrant spirits into hollow shells, their eyes forever haunted by the memory of a world they could never return to. Those few who remained, hiding in the depths of the ruined cities or in the shattered remains of the last bastions of defense, could feel the pulse of the Hive Fleet in the very air. It was a chilling sensation, the knowledge that the Tyranid forces, having devoured all that they could, were not done. They were not finished with the planet. The Tyranids didn't simply conquer. They consumed, they reaped, they stripped every layer of existence until there was nothing left but the bare, lifeless core of the world. The survivors didn't know how much longer they would last, but they knew that they were living on borrowed time. The Tyranid forces would eventually leave, but not before taking every shred of vitality from the planet, ensuring it would never again be a thriving home for any form of life. The finality of it all was overwhelming. The Imperium, for all its might, had been unable to withstand the unimaginable hunger of the Hive Fleet. It was a truth that few could comprehend, but for those who remained, it was a bitter, undeniable fact. The grand vision of humanity's destiny among the stars was now forever tainted, a cruel joke played by the cold, indifferent universe. The survivors were scattered, without purpose, without hope. The memory of the world they had once known would fade, until there was nothing left but whispers in the void. The Tyranid swarm would continue its ravenous march, moving on to its next world, leaving nothing but death in its wake. And the Imperium? The Imperium would never know. From the high spires of the Administratum to the dark halls of the Astra Militarum, the true scale of the destruction would never reach their ears. The Hive Fleet would move on, devouring everything in its path, but the galaxy would continue to turn, as it always had. The survivors, forgotten, would become nothing more than another tragedy, another footnote in the long, unbroken history of the Imperium. The stars would keep shining, the war would keep raging, and in the depths of the galaxy, where the light of the Emperor was dimmed, the Tyranids would find new worlds to consume, their endless hunger forever unsatisfied. But the Imperium, its endless, grinding, eternal engine, would march on, never knowing the true cost of the war. And so, this world, this once proud world, faded into nothing, its bones scattered, its life consumed, leaving only silence. The Tyranids were gone, but the galaxy would never be the same. The end.